On today's RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, we're going to be doing against the grain takes, not really takes, but observations, assertions, if you will. Also talk a little Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor, all coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by Fantrax, Rival Fantasy and Fantasy Sports Knockout. On the Blue Wire Network, I'm Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. We're going to be talking about against the grain takes today. Nick and I have got some not really hot takes. We want to make sure we're distinguished between that, but just maybe anti-consensus opinions. But before we jump into those, Nick, let's talk about the news items of the weekend. The big one is Josh Jacobs coming back to camp. And it's not even that big because we knew it was going to happen. But the fact that he got money, the fact that he got paid a little bit, I think that's noteworthy.
Yeah, it is. I think to me, it speaks to the fact that the Raiders were at least kind of willing to meet him in the middle, and certainly more on their end than the true middle in terms of what Josh Jacobs was looking for. But it's a similar resolution to what we saw with Saquon Barkley out in New York. It's a little bit of a bump other than just like, hey, come back and play on this contract. It's, the team extending somewhat of an olive branch. And I think if you're Josh Jacobs, you'll take it, right? I mean, we already knew he was coming back. We kind of felt like that was going to be the case all along. So not exactly the, contract breakthrough that you're looking for if you're Josh Jacobs, but still a sign, I think, that the team, values him and certainly needs him to get where they want to be this season. I'm now a lot more comfortable, of course, drafting Josh Jacobs, who I wouldn't say he was ever on my complete stay away list, but for a while there, you just never really felt comfortable. The question to me is, where does he come in this year relative to last year? Because I don't see him repeating what he did last season. I think the situation in Vegas was not great last year. I think it's even worse this year.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think that it's a bad team. I think there was people that had a lot of hope for the Raiders last year. They would have been a fun one. Last year, that was a fun against the grain take that they were going to be bad. And I actually made that case on VSiN. I recall last year when we were doing our circuit trip.
Right.
Let's ignore the fact that I was bullish on the Broncos, though. I think
I was right there with you, man. That was one of my all-time worst takes, and I've had a lot of them. That's in the pantheon.
Yeah. So good to own your bad ones too. But yeah, bad team, bad division for them. It was a career year for Jacobs. Everything went right. He played every game. He a couple of times he played through injuries. I mean, that's probably not going to happen this year. I think he's kind of learned a lesson there, and that is don't do that because you're not going to get rewarded. He did get more than Saquon Barkley this year. Yep. He's making $12 million this year. Now, granted, he had over 2,000 yards from scrimmage last year. I'm not trying, and by saying that he's not going to play through this stuff, I don't think that's impugning his character. I think that's the logical way to react to that. For what it's worth, in the last 2 days, I was getting on my flight Saturday morning when they announced the deal with Jacobs. There's been 51 drafts in the NFFC. ADP there is 25. With a low of only 18 and a max of 35. So no one's thought about pushing him to the first round yet. I thought there'd be somebody that'd be like, okay, I'm his patron. He's getting back in enough time. Right. Let's go ahead and put him back to where his stats say he should be. And I think we also maybe have a little bit more sophisticated draft room now where we just don't rely solely on last year's stats as much.
Oh, 100%. I think, we're certainly not alone in being low on the Raiders. And I don't think, even without all this contract drama over the last month, I think Josh Jacobs was going to have a pretty tough time working his way into that round one conversation. I think given the season that Devontae Adams had last year, you would think, oh, maybe he's in that Cooper Kupp zone where you're considering taking him in the middle of round one. And we haven't really seen that either. So I think in general, the fantasy football community, and especially these sharper rooms like the NFFC, are approaching the Raiders overall with a pretty strong degree of caution. And honestly, I think that's the way to go. I've been doing the same thing. One other note on Josh Jacobs. I mean, the fact that he's at a slightly higher salary figure now this year, it does mean that if he does get the tag next year, that tag would come in at a slightly higher price. So he'd be looking at closer to $14.2 million. And of course, the alternative there is that he becomes a free agent and seeks that long-term deal with another team. But going back to what you said, I mean, he still hasn't gotten what he wanted in terms of the long-term deal, right? You want that security, especially at the running back
Guaranteed
position.
money,
So
especially.
yeah, and it's hard to go out and say like, well, man, if he's banged up, he's not going to play through it, and we'll see. And again, it's not an indictment on anybody's character, but you have to look out for yourself if you're Josh Jacobs. So that is something that I think is still in the back of your mind. It's like, all right, he's back with the team. He's getting a slightly higher pay bump. That's all well and good, but his priority is still getting that second contract.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for running backs to do so. So we'll see what happens with that. Would you take him at that 2-3 turn?
Man, I think I would. I think I'd be comfortable with that. He's up about 5 spots in ADP if you just isolate those last 2 days versus like the last 2 weeks. I think that number will end up rising slightly as we approach week 1 here in about a week and a half. I mean, the thing is, it's kind of an interesting zone for running backs. So if you look at the players that are going around him, Derrick Henry will typically go a couple spots earlier. Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor have almost the same ADP now. I'm still waiting on on Jonathan Taylor. We'll see if we get anything by that artificial deadline that was thrown out. The Colts want a trade reached by Tuesday. So perhaps by this time tomorrow, Jeff, we'll have an answer on what's going on with Jonathan Taylor, and we'll be able to evaluate him better for fantasy purposes. But if you pass on Josh Jacobs there, you're seeing a lot of receivers go with the next few picks. You'll see Mark Andrews mixed in as well. That's where you start to see a handful of quarterbacks, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. Occasionally you'll see Trevor Lawrence or Justin Herbert be pushed up into that zone, Joe Burrow. So it's not a complete drop off because you have options like Najee Harris and Jahmyr Gibbs, but that's kind of the end of that. I wouldn't even say tier 1, but kind of a tier 1B of running backs. If you don't take Josh Jacobs there, you're getting into a slightly different caliber of running back. And again, even knowing that this is probably not going to be the greatest team context, it wasn't that great last year. Josh Jacobs was still one of the best running backs in fantasy in any format. So if you can get him at pick 24 to 28, I think that's actually pretty fair.
Yeah. Derrick Henry versus Josh Jacobs. I'm taking Derrick Henry.
Yep.
Henry did go, I did take Derrick Henry in the Beat Jeff Erickson draft last week where I started with Jefferson. Keep in mind that's 3rd round reversal too. So I would probably not take Jacobs with pick 24. I don't know. Maybe I would. I don't know. I'd have to be put to the test on that, but
right.
It's one more player at least that provides an option, maybe allows a wide receiver to fall to me. In my draft, I didn't get Higgins. I didn't get Calvin Ridley to fall to me. I mean, those guys were gone before pick 24. So it was a little bit more wide receiver centric, which made it harder for me too. I was hoping to go receiver to start. I just didn't want to pull the trigger on Devontae Smith. That was the only one in that range that was still available. And I don't know. I just didn't feel it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Even if you're out on Josh Jacobs, like you said, somebody's going to be in on him most likely at that price. So if anything, it kind of gives you another shot at a receiver or perhaps at a tight end if you want to go in that route. But yeah, I mean, the 3rd round reversal, man, that just picking from the 1 spot in 3rd round reversal. It's just, we talked about it on the XM show quite a bit last week. I don't think it's an advantage to pick number 1 in fantasy football this year. And I think if you're doing 3rd round reversal, it's actually a pretty big disadvantage to only have 2 picks, in the top 24 and then have to wait all the way until 36 for that next one.
Yeah. And to that point, I'm doing the NFFC primetime live in Vegas on Saturday. Ooh. And I set my KDS this morning, and 1 through 4 are like my last 4 picks.
Yeah.
That's my last 4 preferences, I should say. I know you start with a Jefferson or Chase, and I'm thrilled about that, but then it's just there's quite a bit of a payback in rounds 2 and 3.
Yeah, I mean, I always make the comparison to fantasy basketball, and it's like, having Nikola Jokic at 1-1 the last 2 years has been a big enough advantage that even if you're playing in a 3rd round reversal league, which is less common in fantasy basketball than it is fantasy football, like it's still worth it because, Jokic was so far and away, especially 2 seasons ago, the number 1 player that you'll pay whatever that cost is in terms of sacrificing later draft capital. But, as great as Justin Jefferson is, as great as Christian McCaffrey and Jamar Chase are, the gap between them and the next best player at their position is not that large, right? It's not large enough that it's worth kind of sacrificing those 12 draft spots if you're talking about picking 1, 24 and then 36. So I'm with you. I have not set my official KDS yet for my RotoWire OC, which will be next week. I think it's on Monday night, actually, right after the XM show. Very much looking forward to that. We're going to have Greg Ambrosius on our show tonight. We'll talk about some of the trends going on over the weekend in the NFFC. But I'm with you. I think I'm going to probably go 11, 12, 10 as my first three preferences.
Yeah, I think I went 10, 11, 12, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So
I think 4 is the one I like the least. 3 and 4. I mean, I don't know. I mean, at 3, you're going to get either McCaffrey or Hill or Kelsey but that's the whole point is I don't distinguish them very well. And then you're getting punished in the second and third round. So that's why I'm kind of going a different way. Jonathan Taylor got that deadline. It's Tuesday. It's synced up with the roster cut deadline, basically. So Colts want to, they want to have, they feel like they have a little leverage by doing it that way. We'll see if that works out. I think I was skeptical about a trade happening. You were talking about how you heard from Ian Rappaport that he thinks it'll still happen. I'm not a big Rappaport fan, but I think he might be right in this instance. I think a trade will happen. I think I was thinking that I was skeptical. I thought the Colts were setting too high a bar, but I think it's just such an intractable relationship here.
I agree. I think, there's certainly a decent amount of spite on both sides. And, we'll see how much, influence Jim Irsay ultimately has in this decision, because I think the Colts front office would certainly want to ensure that they're getting a massive return for Jonathan Taylor. And, if Jim Irsay comes over the top and says, hey, look, if that's the best we got, get rid of this guy. We don't want him on the team. Then maybe that's a situation where they wouldn't really have much of a choice but to accept a below market package. I think the general belief is that Miami is the team that's been most aggressive. We've heard rumors of teams like Philly or potentially Chicago getting involved. But as far as I'm aware, there's not necessarily been a bidding war. At least that's been the sense that I've been getting. Stephen Holder from ESPN tweeted something to that effect this morning. The Colts kind of want to get at least another team seriously involved to try to create that bidding war, drive up the price. But as of right now, if I'm doing a draft tonight and we don't get any news between now and then, I still think I'm staying away. It's just not a risk that I want to take at this point. But I think we will get a resolution one way or another in the next 36 hours here. It is worth noting, Jeff, that Deion Jackson played every snap of the first 2 drives for Indianapolis in their final preseason game this weekend. So, in the event that they trade Jonathan Taylor and don't bring back a notable running back, I think Deion Jackson looks like he's the guy. Now, the other side of that is if they do send him to Miami, which I think is the most likely destination should he leave Indy, my guess is that they send back one of those running backs, whether it's, Jeff Wilson or Raheem Mostert. And, I think that guy would kind of instantly become the player to roster in Indianapolis.
I agree. Although if it's Wilson, I'd be less enthusiastic than I would be if it's Mostert for some reason. Although I understand Mostert's got his durability issues, but I view Mostert more as a guy that could be a major, maybe not 3 down back. I think that might be overstating the case, but a guy that would be the leader instead of like a co-share, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, both those guys, you're worried about injuries, so we're not talking about like a dream situation for fantasy. But I do think Deion Jackson's still involved. Somebody who's probably worth a stab at the end of a deeper draft just to have on the roster. And you're kind of hedging for that potential injury if they were to bring in one of the Miami guys. I don't have much in terms of preseason week 3 takes. We actually saw a fair amount of starters playing, which has bucked the trend in recent years. Aaron Rodgers was out there for the first time in forever. With the Jets offense, threw a touchdown. We saw Jordan Love play a couple series again for Green Bay. One interesting note, fantasy-wise, Quentin Johnston was on the field for the LA Chargers, which, I think you could just look at it and say, look, he's a rookie. They want to get him as many reps as possible. But, no Keenan Allen, no Mike Williams, and Josh Palmer also got the day off in that third preseason game. So I think the other way to read that is, okay, is Quentin Johnston maybe going to begin the season as the number 4 receiver behind Palmer in this offense?
Yeah, and Palmer was hurt earlier, so there might be something to that. And Johnson needs to get his reps. He's had his drops. I think that has been an issue. I still like Johnson's speed. I like his talent, but man, you got to be able to catch the ball. And I was talking last week with James Coe, and I think we can distinguish between this and Jamar Chase a little bit because Johnston had this problem in college too.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. I'm still pretty high on Quentin Johnston. I think there might be a bit of a kind of loading period at the beginning of the season. And obviously, Josh Palmer is somebody who I think a lot of people have liked him. You like the traits, you like the tools, but the production has not necessarily been there. Somebody who wasn't really able to step up in the way that we hoped he would with the injuries they had at receiver last season. But the bottom line is I expect Mike Williams and Keenan Allen likely to miss time at some point this season. So even if Quentin Johnston ends up a little bit behind the eight ball to begin the year, I think there's plenty of weeks where he's going to be acting as the second or third wide receiver because they're without one of those top two guys.
That's right. Before I get on to our against the grain opinions, we're going to share a couple quick promotional notes. First, from Fantrax, for you fantasy football players out there, is there something you wish your fantasy league had or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league, invite your friends, and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy football platform in the industry. Coming from another service? Not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters and customize if needed. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax Commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. If there is anything lacking in your current fantasy league manager, Fantrax likely has it. Fantrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire today to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league, plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right, tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. Also, we are sponsored by our good friends at Rival Fantasy. If you're looking for a place to play head-to-head fantasy football games without the huge tournaments, salary caps, or complicated game types, then Rival Fantasy is where you want to play this NFL season. From a twist on a classic game with Fantasy Bingo, where players generate a lineup to complete achievements and get bingo, to head-to-head fantasy challenges, where you'll pick which of two players will score more fantasy points. This is the best of fantasy sports. For the 2023 NFL season, Rival Fantasy is offering new users a $200 deposit match, plus a $25 first play voucher. Rival Fantasy is so confident you'll love the experience, they're giving you money to play out of the gate. Experience the future of fantasy sports on Rival Fantasy and become a rival today. All right, back with Nick Whalen here, and we're talking about against the grain takes. Why don't you go ahead and explain the concept for people that are just tuning in for the first time?
Yeah, so you and I were out at Circa this past weekend. Had an amazing time out there as always. I always love hanging out with Circa and kind of doing the rounds for SiriusXM and for VSiN. And I was on VSiN and they asked me what are some of your against the grain takes? We're not looking for hot takes here because I think that's a dangerous road. I'm not a hot take guy myself, Jeff. I know you really aren't either. And I think if you're trying to go that route, you're going to end up kind of getting in some dangerous territory, kind of leaning on things that you don't actually believe in. So we're trying to find that middle ground, right? We're not giving out vanilla takes, but we're not trying to just throw something out there for the sake of getting clicks or getting headlines. So I view this as kind of these are like my medium warm takes. There's nothing crazy in here, but we're trying to go against at least the general consensus.
All right, very good. So why don't you start us with the first one?
I will. I got a great list here, kind of a mix of fantasy, betting, just kind of some general thoughts on some teams. And we're going right to America's division, Jeff, the AFC South. I don't think we should be handing the AFC South to Jacksonville, right? I think everybody, kind of sees how the Jags closed last season. They had the crazy comeback against the Chargers, Trevor Lawrence. Everybody wants to put him as a top 6 or 7 quarterback. And let me be very clear. I want all of this to happen. I am the lone Jags fan in the state of Wisconsin. I would like nothing more than Jacksonville to win 13 games and just blow away the rest of the AFC South. But, Tennessee right now, you could get them at like plus 350 over at Circa to win this division. I think the Jaguars win it. They're minus 155. I think the best bet, though, is Tennessee. I don't think we can count this Titans team out. I certainly don't want to count Mike Vrabel out. I love Doug Peterson, but I think Mike Vrabel still has the belt as the best coach and the best talent maximizer in this division. I think Jacksonville has a tougher schedule than the Tennessee Titans. They get that first place schedule. It is not easy outside of division whatsoever. if the Titans could stay healthy, at key positions, I think they're really going to push Jacksonville for that top spot in the AFC South. And look, I mean, ultimately, with how deep the AFC is, this could be a one playoff team division. So as much as I want this to just be the season that Jacksonville kind of establishes itself as an annual contender going forward, I am not at all ready to count out the Tennessee Titans.
Okay, that's interesting because I kind of have negative feelings about the Titans.
Really?
I mean, just kind of saw how they finished last year. What they've done in terms of I know they went out and got D-Hop and they needed to get a wide receiver of some ilk. But I'm kind of negative on D-Hop. I think there's a reason why Arizona wasn't able to trade him. It's because the market was pretty tepid. Mm-hmm. I think between injuries, him kind of quitting on the team last year, just aging curves, the team context. What if Will Levis or Malik Willis is at QB? There are some scenarios there. And by the way, I mean, Willis was playing ahead of Levis, which was interesting. Given what we saw with Willis last year, how they wouldn't even let him throw the ball. I don't know. It's just, yes, their defense always plays hard. Vrabel is good at that. I hate watching their offense. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's just, it's a tough watch. And maybe it stems back to them trading away AJ Brown at the peak of his powers. I just didn't like that either. So maybe you're making some, you make good points. And especially the whole principle of let's not just jump on board with what happened last year as like, and install Jacksonville as an obvious favorite when they had to scrape by a Josh Dobbs led team in the last week of the season just to make the playoffs.
Exactly. And I thought they got the benefit of a 50-50 call. You think of that fumble return that they did not call a forward pass. I was not expecting that to be overturned in the way that it was. So yeah, I mean, they had to scratch and claw just to, like you said, beat Josh Dobbs, who was like on the team for 2 weeks in the final game of the season at home. So it's part of this is, I don't know that Jacksonville really got all that better from last season. And I also think this was not a very good team for roughly 60% of last year. And Trevor Lawrence had a great close to the season, was not great early on, had some major turnover issues. I think Jacksonville is going to beat the teams it should beat, but there's a lot of, big time opponents on this schedule. It's like, are you going to beat Buffalo? Are you going to beat Kansas City? I think they're going to struggle to pull away in this division because of that out of division schedule. And, if Tennessee can steal a win in one of those head-to-head matchups, I think both of these teams could go 4-0 against Indy and Houston. So part of it is I'm just not quite as high in Jacksonville, and I think I'm higher on Tennessee. They had consensus. But like you said, I mean, if they have an injury to Hopkins or Tannehill or Derrick Henry, this goes completely out the window because they're so thin at those positions. And look, chances are one of those guys does get hurt. But if they don't, if they can stay relatively healthy, and especially if they can avoid Malik Willis and or Will Levis starting any games this season, I think Tennessee really pushes the Jags.
Yeah. So on a related note, I have Hopkins at 58. NFFC ADP in the last couple of days is 43. Yep. So it just shows I'm a full round behind. He's 31. I think, when he did come back from a suspension, he was more or less the same player, but he also got hurt at the end of the year last year. I feel like this is the age where wide receivers drop off. I think I'd rather be a year too early than a year too late. I'd rather get out while I can.
That's fair. It's fair. I haven't been taking Hopkins at cost either. I don't know that I'm that worried about him falling off as a player. I think he's probably got one more good year in him before we start entering like that Julio Jones Tennessee year zone. But this Titans offense was just not a high volume passing attack, right? And I don't think just adding 31-year-old DeAndre Hopkins to the mix suddenly changes that overnight. I think the mark in his favor is that he's so far and away clearly the guy on a team that desperately needed receiver help. So in terms of just like a fantasy situation, I think it makes sense for people to be comfortable drafting him in the early 40s. But I just don't know if there's a ton of upside here. Like to me, it's like best case scenario, he meets value, and you don't look back and say, oh man, I wish I wouldn't have taken him. Like I don't envision a scenario where you draft DeAndre Hopkins at 45 and he finishes the season as like the 20th best fantasy player, like the 7th best receiver. I don't think that upside is there in this offense. And this was a Titans team that had 16 passing touchdowns as a team last season. And look, I know Tannehill got hurt and they basically had to run like a high school offense for a few games toward the end of the season. That's certainly a big part of it, but they're way down at the bottom of the league in terms of yards, in terms of attempts, in terms of yards per attempt. Like there's not there's not a single passing stat that you could dig into and say, okay, this is why Tennessee's passing offense is going to be so much better this season. So yeah, I'm with you. If I could get Hopkins around later, absolutely, but I'm not paying for him at cost.
All right. Next, against the grain opinion, for me at least here. Waiting on quarterbacks is not dead. It did not work last year. It was a thinner path to get through maybe the last couple of years, but it's not dead. I still think it can work. I still think it's not mandatory to have a top 8 quarterback. I think it might be. Maybe it's a little more difficult, but typically you get 2 to 3 breakout guys later on. And yeah, every plan works with the right guys. I get that. But whether it's Jordan Love or, Anthony Richardson in his rookie year, or even like Sam Howell or something like that, I think you can still win drafting QBs late. You could even go like boring with Kirk Cousins or Rodgers late and still be okay. I think last year was such an anomaly when it comes to just the elite QBs being parsecs better than the rest of the pack. I don't think that's just because that happened last year doesn't make a predictive stat.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And, I think that if you draft one of the top 3 quarterbacks, and you kind of have to pick and choose who those are, because there's a handful of players who could finish in that range: Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Burrow, Jackson, Herbert, Lawrence, even Justin Fields. That's where we really saw the big divide last year. If you just look at, a very basic stat, average fantasy points per game, Hurts, Mahomes, and Allen were ahead of that next year. You still felt great if you had Joe Burrow, you had Justin Fields, but, Jalen Hurts was averaging like 5 more fantasy points per game than Justin Fields on the year, whereas Justin Fields was averaging roughly 1 more fantasy point per game than Geno Smith. So I think the key is if you're drafting an elite quarterback, you need him to finish as one of the top 3 guys. If you take Joe Burrow as QB4 and he finishes as QB5, it's like, all right, that's fine. You're not going to look back and say it was a terrible pick, but you're probably leaving a little bit of value on the board there. And the other thing is, if you're taking a quarterback early, you really need to hit on whatever position you're inevitably going to be a little bit lighter at, right? So if you start running back and then you take Mahomes in round 2, like, you better hit on those mid-round receivers, because that's where you're going to end up chasing some of that week-to-week value. So, how have you found yourself handling this? Like, we've both done a ton of drafts. I'm sure you've kind of gone with both approaches so far, but when you're in these bigger money, more important leagues, how have you found yourself attacking it?
It's interesting because beat Jeff Erickson, I extreme weighted on quarterbacks. So this is a little bit of a self-serving opinion for me to come out and say afterward, you can still win that way. But I've also done it the other way, where I've gone with the early quarterback. I did the Lamar Andrews pairing in the host league that we did together. That's not same high stakes, mind you, but still it's a path. And when I do that, I do feel like it's a little bit more difficult. Like, I think the tricky part is like it's that second tier of quarterback are now going a lot earlier. Right. You used to be, you get like the last of that tier still in like the 6th or 7th round. And I'm finding many drafts where you just can't.
Yeah, I've been getting a lot of Justin Herbert. Like, I don't think I have a single Mahomes share in any, meaningful league. I think maybe I have Burrow somewhere. Hurts has kind of been my guy who I've been trying to target. Like, I'm not willing to start that run at, pick 20 with Patrick Mahomes. As great as he is, I think he's far and away the best quarterback in the NFL. I don't quite see the upside there. So if I'm going, quote unquote early quarterback, I'm taking Justin Herbert in the 4th round. So kind of hedging a little bit there. You still get 3 players that you feel good about. And yeah, you're paying a premium for that quarterback, but you know how high I am on Justin Herbert. I threw in the Herbert MVP bet this weekend, had to back that up.
What price did you get for that?
What'd you say?
What price did you get for that?
12-1. Didn't feel great about it, but we'll take double-digit odds on that one. So we'll see. I felt in my soul, given how much I've talked up Justin Herbert and this Chargers offense, it would have been wrong for me not to at least throw a little coin on that. But
sure,
you're right about Lawrence and Fields specifically. You see in a lot of drafts now, Allen, Hurts, Mahomes, Burrow, Jackson, Herbert. Those are typically your first 6 quarterbacks. I'm just not quite comfortable paying a mid or even early 5th round price, sometimes even earlier, on Fields and Lawrence. Like, to me, those guys are close enough to some of those like upper tier or upper QB3 tier guys that I don't really want to burn a pick there. Like, I'd rather take Geno Smith in the 11th, like you did, than take Trevor Lawrence in the 5th. And I think the other benefit to waiting on quarterback is, to me, there's a really nice grouping of guys to choose from when you get beyond that top 8, right? Cousins, Prescott, Jones, Geno, even Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff, Derek Carr. I'm a lot more comfortable with this season, I mean, you're getting guys like that in sometimes the 14th or 15th round. So
Right.
I guess if you're waiting on quarterback, like the chances of getting burned and ending up having to start a player that you just really have no confidence in is really low because of how discounted the price is on some of these upper mid-level guys.
Yeah. I think you're right about that. And yeah, it was fine doing that plan in the Beat Jeff Erickson draft. And I think maybe I misstepped by not getting Richardson to go along with Geno just because of the ceiling aspect of it there. But then again, I've been kind of on record saying that I don't think Richardson's going to get it this year. But
I agree.
What if he does? I get it, but I think it's going to be a tough row for him to hoe this year. All right, before we get on to our next take, we're on the Blue Wire Network. Here's one of their ads. All right, we're doing Against the Grain takes. Nick Whalen, you're up. What do you got?
I am starting to waffle very seriously on the Cleveland Browns, and specifically Deshaun Watson. I think for the most part, especially early in draft season, I feel like I was seeing nothing but optimism when it came to the Browns. Our guy Jim Coventry, who we know and love, and certainly I respect his football takes as much as anybody. He's been all over the Browns. He loves them as a dark horse Super Bowl team. He loves them to win that division. And obviously, if you're in on them, you're in on a Deshaun Watson rebound. I just haven't seen a lot of evidence of that. Whether you're watching the limited action in the preseason or you're reading practice reports every day, there's just been a lot of, he looks okay, but he doesn't look like the Deshaun Watson of old. He doesn't quite have that same off-script ability. And, there's been so much going on with Watson over the last couple of years that I'm open to the possibility that we just never see that guy again. That he's just never that same player.
Yeah.
His cap hit jumps to $64 million next season, Jeff, and I think it stays there for 2 more years beyond that. So there's a lot riding on the Browns figuring this out this season, because the roster is not going to be as strong over the next few years as it is right now. And just the lack of any real encouragement regarding Deshaun Watson to me is concerning, because I still think it's likely that he's not nearly as bad as he was last year, but to me, the most likely outcome is he's like just maybe above league average quarterback. He's like the 12th or 13th best quarterback in the league. That's not good enough. If you're Cleveland, you're not paying for that. That's not, you took one of the biggest PR hits that we've seen in recent history, not to mention handing him that massive contract. You're not paying for him to be an average quarterback. I think there are a lot of teams that have questions at that position this season. And if their guy ends up being a league average quarterback, that's just fine. To me, that's not enough in Cleveland. And I have seen no evidence to suggest that Deshaun Watson is going to return to that level. So I don't know how hot of a take that is as we reach the end of the preseason, but I'm starting to kind of back away from Cleveland.
It must be cooling down as a take, because I wrote down on my list lower on the Browns.
Okay.
So, and I am nothing if not Mr. Jeff McSquerickson. So, I don't really go out on a limb that much. So I'm lower on the Browns, higher on the Steelers. That'll be my corollary to go along with that there. Am I buying a little bit into the preseason hype and performance? Maybe a little bit. I might be guilty of that a little bit. It's just also it's year 2 for Pickett. It's, with the improved offensive line, with the rest of the personnel, with a lot of continuity together there. I think that's all going to kind of coalesce together to make them a more efficient offense. They're not going to throw 12 touchdown passes this year. They will throw more than 12. That's not against the grain. I'll say they throw 25 plus touchdown passes.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I love the Steelers. I mean, they looked fantastic against the 12th stringers for the Atlanta Falcons in that preseason game on Thursday. But really, everything's been positive, through the first few preseason games. I mean, it got to the point where Kenny Pickett himself had to calm down his own hype and say, "Look, it's just the preseason. Don't read too much into it." But I think internally they feel really good about the direction they're moving. Another team that I'm higher on that consensus, I think the Atlanta Falcons are really going to surprise people this year, Jeff. I love the over on 8.5 wins for Atlanta. I would even, dabble in to make the playoffs at plus 105 over at Circa and DraftKings. It kind of like the AFC South. It's like, I understand why the Jags are the incumbent. I understand why the Saints are favored to win that division, but I think the Falcons are the better bet. You can get them at plus 215 to win that division. I like the improvements that they made on defense. Now, are they suddenly going to be a top 10 unit? No, I don't think so, but I think they're going to be a lot more competent than they were last season. And, unlike Deshaun Watson, this is kind of one of those teams where if Desmond Ridder becomes a league average quarterback, that is fantastic news for the Falcons. They are not asking Desmond Ridder to be the 7th best quarterback in the NFL. They're asking him to be like the 18th best quarterback. And I think that's in the cards. Like I'm not like all in on Desmond Ridder as his future star, but with what they're asking him to do, with the personnel around him, with the offense that they're running, they just need him to be competent. And look, even if he's not, you have kind of this wild card guy with some upside in Taylor Heineke. So I think they're much better positioned this season at the quarterback spot than they were last year, trying to kind of form that offense around Marcus Mariota, who basically ended up quitting on the team. And beyond that, they have the easiest schedule in the NFL. I mean, first 7 games, Jeff, they get Bryce Young at home in his first NFL start. You get Jordan Love, you get Jared Goff, Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud, Sam Howell, and Baker Mayfield. I mean, I think they have a real chance to start this season like 5-2.
Yeah, it's the defense for me. That's going to be like the determinant for that, because last year their defense was pretty darn bad. And it was their 37 stringers against Pittsburgh starters in the preseason, but Pittsburgh did slice through them a little bit. It was string cheese or something. I don't know. God, that was terrible. Stop. Okay, moving on.
There's got to be some sort of like bird meat pun here, but yeah, we'll keep thinking on that.
Yeah, exactly. Or we won't. We'll just move on and forget it ever happened.
Ironically, this game is actually on NFL Network right now, so I'm like rewatching the Steelers just knife right through this Falcons defense. But nonetheless, I'm just gonna pin that on the fact that Atlanta was not really rolling out any starters.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to another one. You talked about the Jaguars earlier. This is a fantasy take, not an overall take. Travis Etienne's going to be just fine. Everybody loves Tank Bigsby. Loves him. Thinks that, Etienne, he's a big risk. If you click on Etienne, you're going to be unhappy. You're going to be sorry. ADP of 41. I've still got him in the 30s for me. I think he's still dynamic. I still think he's a big play type of guy. I love getting a discounted rate on Etienne. If I can get him in the 4th round, especially if I've covered myself in wide receivers a little bit earlier, gimme. I like it a lot. So Travis Etienne, I've got it 32 in my rankings. I originally even had him higher, but I'm kind of, in this case, wanted to reflect the market rate. So you're not like going, if you're using my rankings, you're not going 2 rounds too soon. But point is, my rankings will get you Etienne like 95% of the time. And I think that's a good idea.
The NFFC has a great tool on their website where you look at ADP, and then if you click on a player, you could basically just see a line graph of, where the ADP has trended since the Super Bowl. So we have a very long sample here, and Travis Etienne's ADP is just a gradual decline. He was going in some of those early drafts that were happening in February and March, he was going inside the top 20 in some of those, and on average was coming in, in like the 22 to 25 range. His new ADP is settled at like 39. And he, in a draft last night, Jeff, he went as late as pick 67. Now, that's a big time anomaly. I don't know what happened there. You're not going to get him in the 60s in almost any draft, but you're getting basically a full round discount compared to a few months ago on Travis Etienne. And I think a big part of that has been the, relative emergence of Tank Bigsby. It kind of feels like just the fact that they took a running back has spooked some people. But you have to keep in mind that this team didn't really have a true backup last year, right? You had James Robinson, and then that whole situation changed when they traded him. And they didn't clearly have a number 2 guy who they felt good about, whether that's Snoop Connor or JaMychal Hasty, and Dearness Johnson is in that backfield now. I'm with you. I don't necessarily see Etienne as somebody who has like, top 18 upside. I don't know that he's going to be a league winner type, but I'm not worried about him at all, especially where you're getting him at this point. I think everything the Jags have said about his role, everything Doug Peterson has commented on, like I think they plan on expanding him in the passing game, kind of limiting him in situations where he shouldn't have been running the ball last year, which was between the tackles all the time. I mean, he had these 20 plus carry games late in the year when he started to slow down a bit. I think they're going to use him a lot more smartly, a lot more efficiently in this offense. So yeah, I'm riding with you on that take.
I think he's the type of player that you're going to roster a lot if you're drafting early 4th round. If you're drafting at the 3-4 turn, I think especially if you start off with 2 receivers early on, I think he's ideal for that. So yeah, I like him quite a bit.
I have on my list, Jeff, that Aaron Jones will finish the season ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs, and I don't care what format you're using, PPR, half point, non-PPR. And part of this is I'm just still really high on Aaron Jones. His ADP has started to come around. I mean, he's kind of the inverse of Travis Etienne. If you look at that line graph over at the NFFC, he's now RB15. We saw him go pretty late in a lot of early drafts. He's going in the 50s. quite a bit. And, now his ADP has moved closer into the mid 40s. And, with Gibbs, I've said it a bunch on this pod and on the show. Like, I love the player. I like the fit, maybe not where they drafted him, but I think go get your guy, whatever. I respect that. I'm not comfortable taking a player like that in the 20s. And, in a lot of drafts, you can maybe get him, in early round 3, early to mid round 3, I should say. But I don't necessarily see the upside with Jahmyr Gibbs. And to me, in order to return that ADP, like you need like a top 10 percentile season. Like this rookie year needs to go about as well as possible for him just to return value, not exceed value. And I think Aaron Jones is kind of the opposite. It's like if he stays healthy, I just don't see a world in which you regret taking Aaron Jones with pick like 47 in your draft.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, in fact, his average pick is 46 now, so he's right around that spot. But yeah, I'm on board with that. I think I may have Aaron Jones a little bit lower, but no, I don't. I actually have him higher. I'm with you. I have him at 41. Yeah. So yeah, sharing good feelings about him. Kind of the end of a running back tier. Him and Kenneth Walker together for me, and then you kind of go down to Breece Hall and Dameon Pierce for me as my next couple ones. So there's a kind of a drop off there for me at least. And Aaron Jones, I'd be happy to take him again. He and ETN are similarly priced, and I actually would take ETN over Jones, but that's because I might be the most bullish on ETN. But point is, I'll take both of them in that spot.
Yeah, to me, like Ramondre Stevenson versus Aaron Jones is more of an interesting decision, and you'll see Stevenson go about 10 to 12 picks higher in most drafts. And like, what's the biggest concern with Aaron Jones? One, I guess it's this Packers offense, taking a step back. But I think we also have to remember that this was not that great of an offense last year. If we want to compare it to 2 or 3 years ago when Aaron Rodgers is throwing 40 touchdowns and winning MVPs, then yeah, it'll probably be a step down from there. But this was not that great of an offense in the first place last season. And I think there's still some lingering, maybe this is the year A.J. Dillon gets it together and starts vulturing more touchdowns. Like, I get that, but I think we also have the exact same concern about Zeke Elliott and Ramondre Stevenson in New England. So I just feel like Aaron Jones has been going like 5 to 10 spots later than he should be all of draft season.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you're probably right about that one there. All right. Before we get, you get a couple more against the grain takes. We got one more piece of business to take care of. Think you've got fantasy football figured out? Think again. Introducing Fantasy Sports Knockout, a new Survivor fantasy league that's worth the challenge. A season-long tournament where every week matters. Strategize, draft, survive. High effort with even higher stakes. Because who likes losing? Draft your lineup, use any players you want. But be careful, you can only use each player once. The lowest scoring entry is eliminated each week. The concept is simple. Survival is not. Stop losing. Start surviving in the only league where skills are tested and strategy pays off. Learn more at survive.fantasyexpertsknockout.com/RotoWire. Again, survive.fantasysportsknockout.com/RotoWire. Fantasy Sports Knockout is available for real money in certain states, but anyone can play in a user-created league. So if you think you know fantasy, prove it. Visit survive.fantasy.expert. Try that again. Visit survive.fantasysportsknockout.com/RotoWire today. All right. Thanks to Fantasy Sports Knockout for joining us on and continuing to sponsor us here. We're going to do a couple more against the grain takes before signing off. Nick, who's next for you?
Oh man, I got a few that I have to choose from here. Let's see.
I'll just keep feeding you and react to them. How about that? So that way you don't have to choose as much.
Okay, sounds good. I have just kind of in general, I'm avoiding the Miami Dolphins.
Okay.
And it's hard to put my finger on exactly why. I think I could probably trace it back to my concerns about Tua more than anything. But I don't have a single share of Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle in any of my non-best ball leagues. And even in best ball, I haven't really been drafting those guys all that much. I really, really worry about Tua's health. And I know he's practiced falling this year. That's all well and good. But, it would be a pretty stunning reversal for a guy who went through the concussion and the injury issues that he did last season to just go the complete other way and have that be a non-factor this year. So with how differently this offense looked last year without Tua, I don't really want to pin my hopes, taking Tyreek Hill like number 4 overall. And, let's say Tua goes down and misses 3 or 4 weeks in the middle of the year. You're going to have a really hard time meeting that value. And, when it comes to Jalen Waddle, I just like a lot of other receivers in that range. Like Jalen Waddle is one of my absolute favorite players in the league. If he was with a different quarterback, I would be drafting him as much as I could. But ultimately, he's still the number 2 receiver in his own offense. And, I like Chris Olave just as much. I like Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, guys who are in similar situations who you can typically get later in drafts. Maybe you wait half a round, another round and get someone like DK Metcalf, Calvin Ridley, even Amari Cooper later on, I'm fine with. So, it's not really a take necessarily, but I just, everybody loves this Dolphins offense, and I totally understand the upside, but I found myself kind of reticent to invest.
Yeah, you're going to get two anon all over you, but
that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, bring it. You say that's fine. All right. Yeah, I think what happens if Jonathan Taylor gets traded to them?
If Jonathan Taylor gets traded there, I'm in on that. I actually love that situation. I think, you look at the running backs who've been able to succeed, especially on a game-by-game basis. Like San Francisco, before Christian McCaffrey showed up under Mike McDaniel, he's kind of just taking these guys off the street, essentially, and turning them into really good running backs. Like Mike McDaniel himself has never had a running back the caliber of Jonathan Taylor. And, Jonathan Taylor kind of operates separately to me from Tua. Like if I'm worried about Tua getting hurt, I'm more concerned about how that affects Waddle and Hill than it does the starting running back. So I would actually think to me, that would be a better situation than Jonathan Taylor just sticking with the Colts and not having any of this drama. Like I don't think Taylor in Indianapolis was ever going to be a perfect fantasy situation anyway. You don't have great receivers. You have a questionable O-line. You have a rookie quarterback who might really struggle at times this season. So if he lands there, I will be in on Jonathan Taylor, but it doesn't really change my calculus on Tua.
All right. I fair enough. I think, for the reasons that you state. I mean, I mean, he's one hit away from being completely shutting down. I mean, that's the scary part there.
Right.
All right. Anything else? You got one more for me here or two more for me?
Yeah, we can kind of go rapid fire through these. In a similar vein to the Dolphins guys, I have not found myself with any Cooper Kupp shares. And this one makes me a little more nervous because of just how incredible Cooper Kupp is when healthy. But I worry about his own health, and I worry perhaps even more about the health of his quarterback. So you're kind of doubling down there with some major concerns for a guy who you're oftentimes investing a top 5 to 7 pick in. And, I think if Kupp and Stafford stay healthy, even if the Rams are a bad team, which I think they still would be, I wouldn't really worry about his production. But the fact that you're worried about two guys who are both very injury prone, Kupp is sneaky old as somebody who came into the league way late. I just, if you could get him a little bit later, like if he was going at the turn, I'd be all in. But I just, that's one where if this goes badly, you're going to have a really tough time recovering if you're taking him that high in a fantasy draft. So I like so many of these other receivers. I view some of those guys who are going a little bit later than him as quite a bit safer, starting with Stephon Diggs, including guys like CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson. I found myself, like if I'm picking 5 or 6, I'll happily take Austin Eckler. I'll happily take Travis Kelce. I'd even consider Bijan Robinson over Cooper Kupp in that spot. So, a situation where I really, really respect the talent, but I'm a little nervous about the injuries for he and Stafford. And I just don't think this is going to be a good team, Jeff. I mean, we had that kind of bizarre report over the weekend from Matthew Stafford's wife, of all people, that, he's just like, he's not really gelling with these rookies. And they're relying so heavily on first and second year guys. I mean, no team in the league has more young players that are really going to be dependent on to play major snaps on both sides of the ball. So it feels like the Rams, kind of like the Titans, are not embracing a rebuild. They want to try it one more time. And I just don't really feel good about the direction this offense is going to head.
I thought I read somewhere that like the Rams had like 50 rookies in camp at the start of camp. Obviously, it's just that's astounding. For a team that said screw the drafts for so many years to be in this sort of position. But that's why they're in that sort of position too, because they've had no depth. So I guess I get it there. Yeah, I don't have any Kupp either. I'm writing chapters down as we do this here so we can post it for our listeners. And I'm writing this one, Fading Cooper Kupp. I feel like I'm like forgetting Sarah Marshall or something, but I probably don't have any Kupp either so far. I know I don't, and I probably don't walk away with him unless he is at that like the 12-13 turn. Right. In which case, then maybe I'd be in on it there. But there are others I'd prefer. I prefer AJ Brown for sure. I prefer Diggs. I'd prefer Barkley. I'd prefer Chubb. I would go that route instead of forcing the wide receiver, which means I probably won't get Kupp.
Yeah. Every now and then he'll go, 10, 11, 12, 13. He's gone as late as 13 in the last week. But yeah, on average, you're going to have to pay that 4, 5, 6 overall price. Here's what else I have on the sheet here, Jeff, and then we could get out of here. I don't love drafting Amon-Ra St. Brown in round 1. As a kind of dovetail to that, I'm not sure that Detroit should be favored as heavily as it is to win the NFC North. I think Miles Sanders is going too low in drafts. I would take Mike Evans over Chris Godwin. And I think Jared Stidham makes at least 3 starts for the Denver Broncos.
Ooh, that's saucy at the end there. Fading Russell Wilson. Of course, he earned his fading. Yeah, I like those. I really like the Stidham one. I think that's eye-opening there. Stidham to Mims. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. Well, and look, I'm not sitting here saying like it's a take to fade Russell Wilson. Like nobody's really even taking Russell Wilson in a lot of drafts. Like maybe you're grabbing him as a second or third quarterback. So I don't think anybody's, like ripping their headphones out and saying, what? You're fading Russell Wilson? But I think there's a world in which this goes really south, right? And they don't necessarily have the same type of commitment to Wilson as the Browns do to Deshaun Watson. Like there are paths here where you're gonna have to eat some money. It's not gonna look great. The organization would be embarrassed with the trade, but Sean Payton kind of has carte blanche, I think, with this roster. And I don't think Russell Wilson, if he plays the way he did last season, he's not going to have the leash that he did under Nathaniel Hackett. And, they went out and paid real money to bring in Jared Stidham. I think he's a guy that they have real belief in and will want to get a look at if this season goes south early on. We already have a couple receivers that are injured for this team. I mean, it hasn't been a banner offseason in that respect. I actually think Russell Wilson has looked okay in the preseason. I think he's looked more like his old self. He's looked a lot more competent. Kind of getting out of the pocket, making things happen there. But, it would, again, there's not a lot of precedent for a player having the disastrous year that he did last year at this age, and then kind of turning around and all of a sudden being the player that he was in the past. So this is maybe you could spin this and say, yeah, maybe Russell Wilson gets hurt and he starts 3 games. But I'm kind of looking at this like, I think there's a real chance Russell Wilson gets benched before the end of the year.
Yeah. And if he does, and the thing is, that trade is done. Like
it's done.
The consequences of it aren't going to change because you cut him or benched him.
Right.
It remain, if it's a bad trade, it will remain a bad trade. And just playing him throughout to justify it is not a good decision-making tree. And you're right. Sean Payton wasn't tied to that either. So we'll see. I mean, they'll have to get off on a better foot. Let's jump through a couple of these questions real quick. Victor asking about having the second pick in a half-point PPR. Basically, the question is, do you in a PPR, full-point PPR, almost always goes Jefferson Chase. Do you push up McCaffrey or Eckler or Kelsey into the second pick in a half-point PPR?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually okay with that. I mean, you'll see all 4 of those guys go number 1, even in full PPR leagues at the NFFC, right? I mean, Kelsey every now and then, and I'm actually on board with that. Third round reversal, it's a tough pill to swallow because you're really going to be behind the 8 ball. If you take Kelsey at 1, you're kind of chasing every other position the rest of the draft. But I think the case for that is, at no position last year was there a bigger gap between Travis Kelsey and the next best guy. So I think if you want to look at it from that perspective, I'm totally fine with that. McCaffrey, the only thing you can really say is the injury risk, right? It's what we've been saying about him his entire career. Like when he's healthy, he's absolutely in the conversation to be the number 1 guy. I think if you turned off injuries for this season, I would take Christian McCaffrey 1-1, but he has more of an injury risk than Jefferson and Jamar Chase. So yeah, it makes you feel maybe a little bit better about McCaffrey, but he also catches the ball enough. Like that's a big part of his fantasy value where it's like, Jefferson and Chase probably lose a little bit. They lose a little bit more in half point versus full point, but it's not necessarily a huge plus for Christian McCaffrey either.
Agreed. Ted Kaczynski, not his real name, said Garrett Wilson's ADP is wild. I see him going in round 2 in so many drafts. Why? So many mocks. You mean as opposed to being in the first round? He's not even close to falling out of the second round. So I'm guessing that's what he's talking about. I mean, Garrett Wilson, is productive with a horrific quarterback situation last year and an offensive line situation. Nonetheless, still managed over 1,100 receiving yards. Yeah, if you mean that he should go in the first round, I'd agree with you. I actually like him better than, for instance, the Sun God. I would take him ahead of Cup probably too.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you're not necessarily going to like jump ADP by 8 picks and take Garrett Wilson 5th overall, although that is his min pick in the last week at the NFFC. So some people are doing that. It's more like, it opens up some possibilities depending on where you're drafting. Like I feel great if I have the 15th pick in a draft and I could get Garrett Wilson there. that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think I like him over CD Lamb. I like him more than I like Amon-Ra St. Brown. And to me, you said it. I think the case for this guy is he was awesome as a rookie with some of the worst quarterback play that we've seen. I mean, he was playing with Chris Streveler at times last season.
Yeah.
So I think there's room for him to improve in every category. He was a 1,000-yard receiver. He was the rookie of the year with horrendous quarterback play. Like the yardage should jump, the touchdown potential could go through the roof. I mean, he could have a 15 touchdown season. Like that is not out of the cards whatsoever. I think he is the hope, at least, is that he's the Devontae Adams in this offense. So yeah, I'm not sure if the if Ted here, our guy, is saying that he should be going higher or lower, but I think to me, he feels like a minor value even at where you're getting him. And this is another guy who, if you were doing early drafts, I mean, he was going in the 30s, sometimes even the 40s in some of these very, very early drafts. And obviously, the ADP started to skyrocket once they made the Rodgers trade.
Yeah. I would ignore the touchdowns because of the terrible QB play last year. I don't think that's very predictive at all. I think it's reflective of what happened last year and not what's going to happen this year, especially under Rodgers. So that's my take on that. All right, guys. Thanks for everybody tuning in. Actually, I did find one more before that. It's all right. Someone, Brooke says someone dropped Dotson for Thielen, put a waiver claim in for him. Yeah, absolutely. I love Jahan Dotson even before the McLaurin injury, but especially with the McLaurin turf toe, which may bother him in week 1. Absolutely make that claim. So
yeah, I mean, you're getting like a round 5 or 6 player there potentially. So yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, Jahan Dotson, I think, much like Garrett Wilson on a smaller scale here. I mean, the biggest feather in his cap is he looked really good as a rookie with terrible quarterback play. And Sam Howell's been really impressive in the preseason. I think we still need to temper expectations there, but it doesn't look to me like it's going to be worse than it was last year at quarterback. And you're not paying a crazy price by any means for Jahan Dotson. Like you said, I think the McLaurin thing is looking like it's going to be minor. I think as of right now, I would expect him to play in week 1, but any sort of turf toe related injury is something that could linger. So, I think you absolutely put the waiver claim in. No question about that. You want this guy on your roster. And, I think there's probably a week or two at some point this season, whether it's in the beginning or, later on, that he could kind of be functioning as like the 1A receiver for Sam Howell. So yeah, I mean, no question you grab him.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We got we got Joe and Jake. Man, I'm just on a roll tonight. We got Joe and Jake tomorrow. On Wednesday, we're going to have the Fantasy Football Consultants joining me in the morning. Make sure to tune in for all the RotoWire Fantasy Football podcasts. Hit that subscribe button. Go check out RotoWire, rotowire.com/pod. That will get you where you need to go to get to check out all of our content there. Again, rotowire.com/pod. And big thanks to our sponsors. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.